an explorer team was heading toward a deserted island in the middle of the South Atlantic. On the ship was a weather officer named David. He had been sent there to observe and record the weather for an entire year during the cold season. The government had provided him with a full year's ration and all necessary supplies, so that he could collect weather data throughout the year and then return. After many days of travel, the team reached the island. When they got off the boat, they saw that the island was completely deserted. There was no sign of human life anywhere, except for a lighthouse and a small house nearby. An old weather officer named Robert had previously been stationed there, but his duty period had ended, and the team had come to replace him. When the team inspected the house, they were shocked. The rooms were filled with scattered belongings, and everything was in complete disarray. It looked as if no one had cared for the place for a long time. They then looked toward the lighthouse. It was surrounded by sharp, pointed wooden stakes, as if someone had deliberately barricaded it to prevent anyone, or something, from entering. The captain and David rang the bell repeatedly. The gate was closed, and there was no response from inside. Finally, they pushed the gate open with force and went in. Inside the lighthouse, they found a lone man named Gruner. When David and the captain asked about the old officer Robert, Gruner said that Robert had gone toward the sea and never returned. He was presumed dead. Hearing this, the team was stunned. The captain gave David the option to return with them, but David refused. He thought that if he could provide a full year of weather data to the government, he would earn a good amount of money. The captain gave him a gun for protection and warned him that the place did not seem safe. He told David to take care of himself. Then the team returned to the ship, promising to come back after a year. Following Gruner's advice, David settled into the house and arranged his living and food supplies. That night, he found an old diary belonging to Officer Robert. The diary contained many notes about the island, including references to a mysterious creature and several sketches. Some parts were incomplete. There was also a photograph of Robert's wife attached inside the diary. David grew tired while reading and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, while collecting weather data, David noticed something strange on the beach. Stones were arranged in an unusual pattern, with shells placed carefully among them. It looked as if someone had performed some kind of ritual. While observing the lighthouse through binoculars, he saw Gruner standing with another human-like figure. But in the blink of an eye, that figure vanished. David assumed it was just his imagination. That night, there was a sudden knock on the door. Holding lamp, David moved toward it, but instead of a human voice, he heard a strange, airy sound. From beneath the gate, the hand of a bizarre creature tried to force its way inside. The hand was not human. Terrified, David hid in the basement. Soon, the creature entered the house and began searching for him. David watched from hiding, and when the creature was about to catch him, he struck its eye with a knife. The creature screamed in pain and fled. At that moment, David was convinced that what was written in the diary was true. The next day, he saw strange footprints in the sand. They were not human, and the tracks led toward the sea. Now David understood why Gruner had surrounded the lighthouse with sharp wooden stakes, to keep the creatures out. David ran toward the lighthouse and asked Gruner for help, but Gruner refused to let him in. He told David that he should have left with the ship. Disappointed, David returned to his house and began reinforcing it. He boarded up the windows with wooden planks, placed sharp stakes all around, and stacked old papers and books outside the gate, pouring oil over them so he could set them on fire to scare the creatures away. Inside the house, he also found an old box containing a gun and several bullets. This gave him some hope. As night fell, his fear grew stronger. As soon as darkness spread, many creatures emerged from the sea and advanced toward the house. David fired bullets, killing some of them, but the others became even more furious. He then set fire to the papers outside the gate. Seeing the flames, the creatures retreated, but the fire spread to the house itself. The entire wooden house went up in flames. Wrapping himself in a blanket, David hid behind a large rock near the lighthouse. Heavy rain began to fall, extinguishing the fire, but the house had already turned to ashes. To survive, David now had no choice but to go to the lighthouse. He hid nearby and waited for Gruner to come out to fetch water. When Gruner appeared, he was accompanied by a creature. That creature turned out to be Gruner's pet. David was about to attack it, but Gruner stopped him and said, "Stop. This is my pet." David made a deal with him. If Gruner wanted to keep the creature alive, he would have to allow David to stay in the lighthouse. Otherwise, David would kill the creature. In the end, Gruner agreed, because David had food supplies and gunpowder. The two of them shared the remaining food and, exhausted, fell asleep. The next morning, the creature was licking David's hand, and miraculously, his injured hand healed completely. David was astonished. He wanted to learn more about the creature and believed that if it truly possessed some kind of magical power, they could tell the world and gain fame and wealth. However, Gruner did not want that. The island had become his entire world. He lived like a king there, and did not want anyone to leave. Gruner explained that the creature had once been caught in his fishing net when it was young, and he had raised it ever since. But Gruner was cruel. He treated the creature badly, and physically abused it every day. Because of this, the other sea creatures came out at night, trying to rescue their companion. They wanted to take her back to the sea. During the daytime, sunlight burned the creature's skin. That was why they could only come out at night. David no longer wanted to stay on the island. He wanted to leave somehow. But over time, a unique bond formed between David and the female creature. He named her Anarias. Their friendship and deepening emotions changed David. He began to understand how painful loneliness and isolation could be. Anarias, too, missed her own people. Months passed, and suddenly the creature attacks began to decrease. David thought they might have migrated somewhere for the winter. But Gruner said they would return, and in greater numbers. One evening after dinner, David and Gruner started playing chess. They became so absorbed in the game that they forgot to turn on the lighthouse light. Taking advantage of the darkness, the creatures attacked suddenly. This time, there were so many of them that the two men could not hold them off together, and their ammunition ran low. They retreated all the way to the top of the lighthouse. Gruner was badly injured. By morning, boxes of dynamite. Some creatures appeared in the water, and David panicked and surfaced quickly. The suit was heavy, but he survived. Together, they laid dynamite in 2 layers around the lighthouse. The plan was simple. The next time the creatures attacked, the entire breed would be destroyed. Months later, winter arrived, and the creatures began disappearing more often. Perhaps they had become cautious. Then a final plan was set in motion. David asked Anarias to scream from the top of the lighthouse, so she could call the others. When the creatures came, they would head toward the main gate. Gruner intended to pull the lever and detonate the dynamite. But David had cleverly disconnected the lever so that Gruner could not trigger the correct connection even by accident. When the creatures gathered at the lighthouse, David reconnected the wires and detonated the first layer. Many creatures were destroyed. Then the second layer exploded as well, causing a massive blast. Both men lost consciousness. When they woke up, Anarias was gone. The remaining creatures were either dead or badly injured. David noticed a necklace around the neck of one creature. Attached to it was the photograph of a woman, the same photo he had seen in Robert's diary. At that moment, David realized that these creatures had once been human, or at least human-like. They had relationships. They had families. His heart grew heavy. But for Gruner, none of this mattered. To him, power was everything. After that day, the attacks stopped. Yet crying sounds could often be heard from the seashore. David saw small creature children. They had been orphaned. He built a small circle of stones for them and placed a tiny toy boat he had made in the center, hoping that Anarias might see it and return. He waited for hours, but she did not come back. The next day, David saw Gruner sleeping, with an old photograph beside him, the same woman whose picture he had seen earlier in Robert's diary. Then the truth struck him. Robert had not gone missing at sea. Gruner was Robert. He had changed his name because he no longer wanted to leave the island. David lost hope of ever returning home. That night, Anarias and her people emerged from the sea again. This time, they came unarmed, offering peace. They only wanted a safe place for their children. But Gruner attacked them. He fired a flare gun, and the flare struck one of the creature children, killing it. Terrified, all the creatures fled, and Ananias lost her trust in David. Consumed by anger and regret, David decided to confront Gruner. He tried to explain that the creatures did not want to fight, they wanted peace. But Gruner was too far gone. He tried to kill David. In rage, David shouted his old name, "Stop, Robert. You are not a murderer." Hearing this, Gruner froze and broke down. He had become what he was because of loneliness, the death of his wife, and deep depression. He was not a killer by nature. Gruner repented for what he had done. In the end, he surrendered himself to the creatures. Within moments, they killed him. David locked himself inside the lighthouse. Time passed slowly. 1 year later, a government officer and a new weather officer arrived. When they asked David about the previous officer, David told them the same story, that he had gone toward the sea and never returned. The new weather officer began to suspect that David himself might be Gruner. David did not correct their misunderstanding. He stood silently on the balcony. The island had now become his world, just as it once had been Gruner's. Ananias was safe with her family. They no longer feared someone like Gruner. They could live freely on the island and in the sea. The story ends here, a tragic yet meaningful tale of humans and creatures alike. David chose a new life. On an island, he